Okay, now we're going to move on to writing the legislation story, which is your only uh, product goal from Pre-Leg 1. Alright, the legislation story for youth and government is going to follow a three-part structure. You can have your lead. Alright, the lead is where you're going to just basically state the delegation, the group that's sponsoring it, what the legislation is, and what it intends to do. Very clear statement. A delegation from Lake Park proposes legislation that will legalize prostitution throughout the state of Illinois. Okay, very um, clear cut and straightforward. Your second part is why. Why did they write this? What do they hope to accomplish? What difficulties do they see? What was the process involved, and so on. In this element of the story, you're going to let the bill brief and the sponsors talk. This is where they're going to have voice. Okay, this isn't kind of like an essay, an argumentative essay where you, as the writer, take voice. The voice is coming from them. So a lot of quotations, a lot of statements from the bill brief, I should say, and from the sponsors and the lobbyists. Then the last part, how you kind of close, is what do the other delegates think about this legislation? Okay, where you end with 4 or 5 statements from other delegates, like, the delegates are mixed on this legislation, and then you give some mixed reactions and you let those delegates speak. So the main thing to remember is, as you're doing this, that the people you interview are the main focus of the story. All right, so the format for writing. The copy of this legislation story sample is also on the website, so you can kind of look at it there. Your lead, you can have a creative lead if you want to go with something creative other than just a statement of what it is. The one up here you clearly see is just a very declarative statement of what the legislation is. It should be 1, possibly 2 sentences stating what the legislation is being proposed and who's proposing it and what it intends to do. As you let the bill brief and you let the sponsors talk, we generally follow the paraphrase quote rule. So you have your quotation you can include in your story. Before the quotation, you should kind of give a lead-in statement that leads into the quote, somehow paraphrases the quotation that's coming after it. Like, for example, let's say the legalizing prostitution bill, one of the main goals is to raise revenue for the state. You can put in your paraphrase before that for the bill sponsors, this bill is entirely about revenue, and then you go into the quote on how much money they think this is going to make. The one thing about the paraphrase quote is be sure that your paraphrase and the quotation that follows the paraphrase, that the language is not the same. All right. Like, for instance, let's say you have a quotation that the bill sponsor looks forward to working with the legislature to pass this bill, and you want to put that in there as a quote. You don't want to paraphrase, the bill sponsor looks forward to working with the legislature to pass this bill. Quote, I look forward to working with the legislature to pass this bill, says, whoever said whatever the person's name is. So be sure your paraphrase leads into that but doesn't repeat exactly what's in there. Big thing when you quote, remember that you list the full name of the person who said the quote, what their job is in youth and government in the high school that student attends. All right. After you quote them the first time, then you just refer to them by last name. But that first time, those are the big things. Now you can kind of blend those. What I mean by that is, for example, in your introduction, you can say, bill sponsor so and so from Lake Park wants this legislation to do whatever. Now you quote the person, said Johnson, a senator, or said Senator Johnson. So you put in the quote what their job is, and you put in the paraphrase the school they come from and what their name is. So you don't have, within that paraphrase quote, you just make sure that you have those 3 things: full name, job, and school. Okay, you put it all in one descriptor. Senator, Joe Johnson from Lake Park sponsoring legislation, or you can break it up into the 2. But just remember, if you keep quoting somebody, last name only after the first time you quote them. Make sure you get more quotes than you're going to use, just because you want something to go to. You don't want to use all the quotes you have. You want to pick the best ones that give you the best information. And as I said earlier, good demographics. Don't just pick friends. Don't just pick one gender, one school. Get out there. This is very specific, very important when you get to March, when we have people from across the state. Obviously, for Pre-Ledge 1, you guys are very localized, in regions throughout the state, so it's harder to get a geographic cross-section, but still do your best. Paragraphs in this type of writing should be at most 2 to 3 sentences long. That paraphrase quote thing is very, very important for us. Just disregard the phone. And you do that throughout the whole piece. Youth and government is always abbreviated YNG. Okay, so we never say youth and government, it's always YNG as we do that. You'll see throughout these next 2 slides a sample article that I've highlighted with issues that you should cover. I really encourage you to read through that, and kind of identifies the steps that you should follow. Alright, so kind of getting near the wrap up of writing the legislation story. You need to email me a copy of your legislation story before Pre-Ledge 2. Alright. Also, get some photos at the Pre-Ledge. Good photos are candid shots of anybody. That's not the smiling for the camera shots, but candid shots. Try to get your bill group debating the bill, talking to people, things we could put in the paper. If you email me these photos, which is what I want you to do, please email me a cut line, who's in the photo, what they're doing, the who, what, where, when, why type thing, so I know. So when I put them in the paper, put them online, I can identify who those individuals are. So please take care of that. Last point I want to make, if you did not email me or have your advisor email me your non-candidate interview story, please take care of that. And with that non-candidate interview story, if you can also email a photo of that person. Now that can be maybe a smiling for the camera photo, but candids are better. But if you could think of it, the person you interviewed, send me a photo of them as well. Alright, with that I will sign off, and I will see you guys in March.